Today is Earth Day, and climate activists are joining the tributes to Pope Francis for his environmental advocacy. The Pope met with activist Greta Thunberg in 2019. Global advocacy group earthday.org has put out a statement of condolence and thanks for the Pope's work. The group calls Pope Francis the world's most earnest and influential voice in protecting our planet. For more than 10 years, it says Pope Francis has taken countless actions to bring to life the cultural, spiritual, and educational dimensions of the climate challenge. CBC Science and Climate reporter Anand Ram joins us to talk more about Pope Francis as an environmental activist. So Anand, tell us what Francis did to protect the planet.
So, Andrew, one of the big things he did quite early in his pontificate was Laudato Si, on care for our common home. He was talking about the planet. And you can think of it as a kind of a positional paper for the church, right? He said he wanted to send, in the face of environmental deterioration, he wanted to send this message not just to Catholics, but to every person on the planet. He said, the earth cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse. And in this letter, he called out the kind of detractors that we see to the climate movement in the sense of climate change denialism, the powerful lobbying and opposition to doing something about it, and even the sort of like unquestioned faith in technological solutions to get us out of the problem. But as a climate reporter, I was struck reading this as at how much science was in it. And here's a line. So this might sound like rhetoric, but he says, pardon me, he says that the earth is starting to turn into more and more of an immense pile of filth. Now that sounds like rhetoric, but he backs it up immediately with a bit of science, talking about the bioaccumulation of toxins from pollution. He talks about ocean acidification, sea level rise, and that is just sort of the kinds of ways that he combined both fact and faith in this document. And perhaps not surprising because he did have a master's degree in chemistry. So, but this encyclical, this letter, was a very clear statement that Pope Francis made on safeguarding the planet.
Interesting. And his namesake, Francis of Assisi, was known as the patron saint of ecologists and promoted harmony with nature. So what was the impact of this letter?
So, I mean, it's cynical to say not much because we're still on track for many degrees of warming above the pre-industrial average. But you got to take us back to 2015, and this was the time of the Paris Agreement. This was the landmark Paris Agreement, and many leaders had said how Pope Francis's words and this letter had helped them in bridging connections to arrive at that landmark decision. And it also served as a powerful moral imperative. I spoke to Catherine Hayhoe. She's a Canadian climate scientist and global chief scientist at Nature United. And she talked about sort of social tipping points. What pushes people to take climate action? Take a listen.
One of those tipping points is making the moral case for climate action. Not just the practical case, not just the economic case, although those are very important, but the moral case of why this is the right thing to do. And that is what Pope Francis did so strongly. He spoke out clearly about the science, but he was also crystal clear on the fact that climate change is a justice issue. It disproportionately affects those who've done the least to cause the problem in the first place.
And, you know, years later, in 2023, he did issue a follow-up and wasted no time kind of blasting the lack of progress being made, that the climate crisis had become that much worse. He called out those He called out those same forces of denialism and technocratic solutions. But, you know, he also called out what he called weak international politics at these climate conferences that are very disappointing ultimately to action. And it was blunt. He said, quote, "It is no longer possible to doubt the anthropic origin of climate change." But last thing I want to mention is that beyond these sort of global calls to action, he also worked locally. He asked the leadership of the Vatican last year itself to look into a solar power plant to potentially power the city-state on renewable energy.
Interesting. All right, Anand, thank you. That's CBC Science and Climate reporter Anand Ram.